Welcome, Facebook friends and family. We are here yet again for our online book club. Thank you so much. As most of you guys follow us, you're getting a notification on your phones that is letting you know that, hey, Boys and Girls Clubs of Southern Illinois is live. And yes, we are live. So please do me a favor. Go ahead, hit that share button. If you're watching the rebroadcast of this, please do the same thing as well. Hit that share button. If you're some club members or some community members, just wave in the chat. Put a little emoji up, smiley face, thumbs up. Give a little wave, a little fist pound. Just let us know that you're here. We love when we get the chance to interact with you as well. So going to give everyone some time to get in, and as everyone's getting in, let's just go into a little recap. We had chapters 5 and 6 yesterday, and in those chapters, we are now, I think, the scope and the weight of what's happening, and we are really now going to trek through the middle passage of this book and to see how is Brian going to handle a lot of the adversities that he has coming up. One of the main things that stuck out to me in chapter 6 and 7 is that now he's having the mentality and the resiliency. Let be one of our words for this week and just this season that we're in, that being resilient in adverse situations is a character trait that I think will help a lot of us get through a lot of things in life. When understanding that, hey, problems are going to come, situations and trials are going to come, but if we take those things and we're resilient and we make a plan and we put some focus to it, then we can come out better on the other side. And we see Brian here, I believe he's doing just that. He's reminded of his teacher that he had back home and how he was such a positive motivator in his life, and reminding him, hey, tell him that, hey, he can do this. So let's keep it short, sweet, and simple. What do you need to do? You need to find food. You need to find shelter. And he's now progressing through these things. But you got to understand, he's just been through a harrowing experience, starting his journey from finding out that his parents are getting divorced and now having to spend summers with his father and flying on a small plane, and tragically the pilot passing away on that plane and him having to crash land on a lake, and then now being broken, bruised, and battered. He's hungry and trying to find ways to survive and hold out hope that someone is going to come rescue him. So we are here now. Chapter 6 ended. He fell asleep. His stomach is turning, though. We have to own it. He found some berries, but if you know anything about outdoors, you can't eat everything you find outdoors. So we see here now he fell asleep, and we're waking up with him starting on chapter 7. So if you're ready, I know I am. Just a reminder, though, it is 12 noon. We will be doing our lunches, and we thank CCHS for helping us and providing those assistance. We'll be serving lunches from 12 to 1:30, and then also we'll be serving suppers from 3:30 to 5:30. When you come up, please understand we're just wanting to be safe and practicing all the social distancing guidelines. You will see colorful X's that are marked on the ground. If there's someone ahead of you in line, just please wait patiently at that X, and then you can move on up. We want to make sure we just give everyone their 6 feet, and we want to try to make sure that we get through this as quick as possible. So please help us out in following the guidelines that we have set out there. They'll be listed as you come up as well. But please come join in, grab us lunch 12 to 1:30, and then we will also have our suppers from 3:30 to 5:30. But I think we gave everybody enough time to tune in or to watch the rebroadcast later. Let's jump right into chapter 7. Mother! He screamed it, and he could not be sure if the scream awakened him or the pain in his stomach. His whole abdomen was torn with great rolling jolts of pain. Pain that doubled him in the darkness of the little shelter, put him over and face down in the sand to moan again and again, "Mother, mother, mother." Never anything like this. Never. It was as if all the berries, all the pits had exploded in the center of him and ripped, arid, and tore at him. He crawled out the doorway and was sick in the sand, then crawled further and was sick again, vomiting with terrible diarrhea for over an hour. For over an hour, he thought, until he was at last empty and drained of all strength. Then he crawled back into the shelter and fell again to the sand, but could not sleep at first, could not do anything except lie there. And his mind decided then to bring the memory up again. In the mall, every detail. His mother sitting in the station wagon with the man, and she leaned across and kissed him. Kissed the man with short blonde hair. And it was not a friendly peck, but a kiss. A kiss where she turned her head over at an angle and put her mouth against the mouth of the blonde man who was not his father, and kissed mouth to mouth, and then brought her hand up to touch his cheek, his forehead, while they were kissing, And Brian saw it all. Saw this thing that his mother did with the blonde man. Saw the kiss that became the secret that his father still did not know about. The memory was so real that he could feel the heat in the mall of that day. He could remember the worry that Terry would turn and see his mother. He could remember the worry and shame of the memory as it faded, and he slept again. Awake. For a second, perhaps two, he did not know where he was. Was he still asleep somewhere? Then he saw the sun streaming into the open doorway of the shelter and heard the close, vicious whine of the mosquitoes and knew. He brushed his face, completely welted now with 2 days of bites, completely covered with lumps. He was surprised to find the swelling on his forehead had gone down a great deal. It was almost gone. The smell was awful, and he couldn't place it. Then he saw the piles of berries at the back of the shelter and remembered the night of being sick. Too many of them, he said aloud. Too many gut cherries. He crawled out of the shelter and found where he'd messed the sand. He used sticks and cleaned it as best he could, covered it with sand, and went down to the lake to wash his hands and get a drink. It was still very early, only just past true dawn, and the water was so calm he could see his reflection it frightened him. The face was cut and bleeding, swollen and lumpy, the hair all matted, and his forehead, a cut had healed but left the hair stuck with blood and scab. His eyes were slits in the bites, and he was somehow covered in dirt. He slapped the water with his hand to destroy the mirror. Ugly, he thought. Very, very ugly. And he was, at the moment, almost overcome with self-pity. He was dirty and starving and bitten and hurt and lonely and ugly and afraid and so completely miserable that it was like being in a pit, a dark, deep pit with no way out. He sat back on the bank and fought crying, then let it come and cried for perhaps 3-4 minutes, long tears, self-pity tears, wasted tears. He stood, went back to the water, and took small drinks. As soon as the cold water hit his stomach, he felt the hunger sharpen, as it had before. And he stood and held his abdomen until the hunger cramps receded. He had to eat. He was weak with it again, down with the hunger, but he had to eat. Back at the shelter, the berries lay in a pile where he had dumped them when he grabbed his windbreaker. Gut cherries, he called them in his mind now. And he thought about eating some of them, not such a crazy amount as he had, which he felt brought on the sickness in that night, but just enough to stave off his hunger a little bit. He crawled into the shelter. Some flies were on the berries, and he brushed them off. He selected only the berries that were solidly ripe, not the light red ones, but the berries that were dark, maroon red to black and swollen in ripeness. When he had a small handful of them, he went back down to the lake, splashed water on them. Small fish scattered away when he splashed the water up, and he wished that he had a fishing line and hook. Then he ate them, carefully spitting out the pits. They were still tart, but had a sweetness to them, although they seemed to make his lips a bit numb. When he finished, he was still hungry, but the edge had gone, and his legs didn't feel as weak as they had. He went back to the shelter. It took him a half an hour to go through the rest of the berries, sorting them, pulling the fully ripe ones in a pile on some leaves, and the rest in another pile. When he is done, he covered the 2 piles with grass. He tore from the lake shore to keep the flies off and went back outside. They were awful berries, those gut cherries, he thought. But there was the food of some kind, and he could eat a bit more later tonight if he had to. For now, he had a full day ahead of him. He looked at the sky, through the trees, and saw that while there were clouds, they were scattered and did not seem to hold rain. There was a light breeze that seemed to keep the mosquitoes down, he thought. Looking along the lake shore, if there was one kind of berry he should eat, or other kinds, maybe sweeter kinds. If he kept the lake in sight as he had done yesterday, he should be all right. Should be able to find home again. And it stopped him. He had actually thought at that time. Home. 3 days? No 2? Or was it 3? Yes, this was the 3rd day, and he thought of the shelter as a home. He turned and looked at it, studied the crude work. The brush made a fair wall, not weather-tight, but it cut most of the wind off. He hadn't done so badly at all. Maybe it wasn't much, but also maybe it was all he had for a home. All right, he thought, so I'll call it home. He turned back and set off on the side of the lake, heading for the gut cherry bush, his windbreaker bag in his hands. Things were bad, he thought, but maybe not that bad. Maybe he could find some better berries. When he came to the gut cherry bush, he paused. The branches were empty of birds, but still had many berries. and some of those had been merely red yesterday were now a dark maroon to black, much riper. Maybe he should stay and pick them to save them. But the explosion in the night was still much in his memory, and he decided to go on. Gut cherries were food, but tricky to eat. He needed something better. Another 100 yards up the shore, there was a place where the wind had torn another path. These must have been fierce winds, he thought, to tear places up like this, as if the path he had found with the plane when he was crashed. Here the trees were not all the way down and dead, but twisted and snapped off halfway up from the ground, so their tops were rotten and gone, leaving the snags poking into the sky like broken teeth. It made for tons of dead and dry wood, and he wished once more he could get a fire going. It also made a kind of clearing. With the tops of the trees gone, the sun could get down to the ground, and it was filled with small, thorny bushes that were covered with berries. Raspberries. These he knew because there were some raspberry bushes in the park, and he and Terry had always been picking and eating them as they biked past. The berries were full and ripe. He tasted one to find it sweet with none of the problems of the gut cherries. Although they did not grow in clusters, there were many of them, and they were easy to pick, and Brian smiled and started eating. Sweet juice, he thought. Oh, they were sweet, with just a tiny tang. And he picked and ate, and picked and ate, and thought that he had never tasted anything this good. Soon as before, his stomach was full, but now he had some sense, and he did not gorge or cram more down. Instead, he picked more and put them in his windbreaker, feeling the morning sun on his back and thinking he was rich with food now, just rich. And he heard a noise to his rear, a slight noise, and he turned and saw the bear. He could do nothing, think nothing. His tongue, stained with berry juice, stuck to the roof of his mouth as he stared at the bear. It was black, with a cinnamon-colored nose, not 20 feet from him, and big, no, huge. It was all black fur and huge. He had seen one in the zoo in the city once, a black bear, but it had been from India or somewhere. This one was wild and much bigger than the one in the zoo, and it was right there. The sun caught the ends of the hairs along his back. Shining black and silky, the bear stood on his hind legs, half up, and studied Brian. Just studied him, then lowered itself and moved slowly to the left, eating berries as it rolled along, ruffling and delicately using its mouth to lift each berry from the stem. And in seconds it was gone, and Brian still had not moved. His tongue was stuck to the top of his mouth, the tip half out, his eyes were wide, and his hands were reaching for a berry. Then he made a sound, a low mmm. It made no sense. It was just a sound of fear or disbelief that something that large could have come so close to him without his knowing. It just walked up to him and could have eaten him, and he could have done nothing at all. And when the sound was half done, a thing happened with his legs, a thing he had nothing to do with, and they were running in the opposite direction of the bear, back towards the shelter. He would have run all the way in panic, but after he had gone perhaps 50 yards, his brain took over and slowed, and finally stopped him. If the bear wanted you, his brain said, he would have taken you. It is something to understand, he thought, not something to run away from. The bear was eating berries, not people. The bear made no move to hurt you, to threaten you. It stood to see you better, study you, then went on its way eating berries. It was a big bear, but it did not want you. Did not want to cause you harm, and that's the thing to understand here. He turned and looked back at the stand of raspberries. The bear was gone. The birds were singing. He saw nothing that could hurt him. There was no danger here that he could sense, could feel. In the city at night, there was sometimes danger. You could not be in the park at night after dark because of danger. But here, the bear looked at him and had moved on, and this filled his thoughts. The berries were so good, so sweet and rich, and his body was so empty. And the bear had almost indicated that it didn't mind sharing. He just walked from him. And the berries were so good. And he thought finally, if he did not go back and get the berries, he would have to eat the gut cherries again tonight. That convinced him. And he walked slowly back to the raspberry patch and continued picking for the entire morning. Although with great caution, and once when a squirrel rustled some pine needles at the base of a tree, he nearly jumped out of his skin. About noon, The sun was almost straight overhead. The clouds began to thicken and look dark. In moments, it started to rain, and he took what he had picked and trotted back to the shelter. He had probably eaten 2 pounds of raspberries and had maybe another 3 pounds in his jacket rolled into a pouch. He made it to the shelter just as the clouds completely opened and the rain roared down in the sheets. Soon the sand outside was drenched, and there were rivulets running down to the lake. But inside he was dry and snug. He started to put the picked berries back into the sorted pile with the gut cherries, but noticed that the raspberries were seeping through his jacket. They were much softer than the gut cherries, and apparently were being crushed a bit by their own weight. When he held the jacket up and looked beneath, he saw a stream of red liquid. He put a finger to it and found it to be sweet and tangy, like pop without the fizz. And he grinned and lay back on the sand, holding the bag up over his face and letting the seepage drip into his mouth. Outside, the rain poured, but Brian laid on his back, drinking the syrup from the berries, dry and with the pain almost gone, the stiffness almost gone, his belly full, and a good taste in his mouth. For the first time since the crash, he was not thinking of himself or of his own life. Brian was wondering if the bear was as surprised as he was to find another being in the berries. Later in the afternoon, as the evening came down, he went to the lake and washed the sticky berry juice from his face and hands, then went back to prepare for the night. While he had accepted and understood that the bear did not want to hurt him, it was still much in his thoughts, and as darkness came into the shelter, he took the hatchet out of his belt, put it by his head, his hand on the handle, as the day caught up with him, and he slept. Well, guys, there you go. Chapter 7. I mean, this is just like a bear in the woods. Like, I don't know what you would have done, but if I was sitting there and a bear popped up while I'm trying to get my lunch, whoo, I don't know. But Brian, like I said, he's showing such poise, and our word for the day, resiliency. He thought and he knew, look, the bear is just as scared as me as I am of the bear. So guess what? I'm not going to let that stop me from going getting my berries because I need something to eat. And look, he made him some berry juice too. So we see Brian being resilient, finding something better than the gut cherries to eat. Now, what's going to happen in chapter 8? He still has a lot to do. When is help going to arrive? How is he going to find a way out? Who's going to come save him? Well, if you want to know, you're going to have to tune in at 3 o'clock later on today. Just a reminder, it is about 12:15. We're still serving our lunches. So please, from 12 to 1:30 every day, Monday through Friday, come join us for a meal. If you want a copy of the book Hatchet, you can have one available as well. And currently, our YouTube videos are going up, so please follow. We're going to have those links being posted. If you want to share these with people that may not have Facebook, may not be connected to social media, YouTube is going to be a great avenue to do that. So, yet again, please join us at 3 o'clock as we get to chapter 8 and we find out what happens next. Have a great day.